At 6:45 on the humid morning of August 17, 1943, the air at WWII airfield pulsed with a nervous kind of energy, the sort that settles between palm fronds and steel propellers before the first wave of warplanes climbs into the Pacific sky. Technical Sergeant James McKenna stood silently beneath the outstretched wing of a P-38 Lightning, a machine he'd come to know better than himself, wiping a streak of hydraulic fluid from his palm, every muscle tensed as if he could will the day's outcome to go differently than all those which had come before. Lieutenant Robert Hayes, farm boy trim and wide-eyed at 23, was climbing the ladder to his cockpit, boots echoing against aluminum in the dawn quiet. 6 combat sorties, 0 victories, and a fate that felt inked in the margin of an operations log. Maybe this would be the day his luck turned. Or maybe, like so many others, he'd vanish over burning jungle without warning. Hayes wasn't a reckless pilot, and when he had questioned the doctrine, fellow aviators shook their heads with the eloquence of men who'd seen too much. Fight smart. Die anyway. Such was life in the 5th Air Force. McKenna wasn't trained as a hero. He was a mechanic, a specialist in the language of bolts and bearing grease, in the clatter of tools after midnight, and the subtle note a tight cable makes when plucked, which no manual describes. For 8 relentless months, he'd serviced twin-boomed Lightnings, machines that could outpace nearly anything in a straight line, scream to the edge of the stratosphere, and bring a pilot home through storms of metal. But a flaw lurked in their design, an Achilles heel that stalked the flight line with a quiet inevitability. The P-38s, all power and presence, were unmatched at altitude, but the realities of aerial combat rarely allowed perfect circumstances. The Japanese Zero, lighter, nimble as a dragonfly, could carve tight arcs in the sky, performing a horizontal turn in half the time American fighters needed. The dogfight math was merciless. Turn with a 0, and fate was sealed. American pilots were drilled on one lesson above all: never get tangled in a turning duel with a 0. Instead, they were urged to attack with speed, utilize superior climb and dive, and break away before the enemy could close, the essence of boom and zoom tactics. Hayes had committed this doctrine to memory, lived it on sorties where every decision was measured in milliseconds. But as weeks passed, losses mounted with punishing simplicity. 37 P-38s lost in 6 weeks, most shot down after falling into the very trap everyone promised could be avoided. After each mission, Hayes and others returned shaken, stories nearly identical. Rolled to engage, aircraft felt sluggish, a momentary delay between command and response, just long enough for a 0 to draw a bead. Some pilots survived, thanks to the sharp shooting of wingmen or the grace of chance. Most did not. No one noticed. Inspection teams were busy with ammunition belts and oil filters, not cable tension. As the sun clawed its way higher above the jungle, Hayes took off, the P-38 roaring toward a sky already thick with Mitsubishi fighters. McKenna watched him vanish into the blue. The war for that moment rested on whether a small act of insubordination could translate into survival. At precisely 8:14, just 32 minutes after lifting off into a vibrant New Guinea morning, Lieutenant Robert Hayes's flight entered the chaotic dance of life and death high over Huon Gulf. 19 P-38 Lightnings streaked across the sky in tight formation, slicing through humid air toward the threat that awaited them, a swarm of 900 Mitsubishi Zeros glinting like a cloud of hornets under the harsh glare of the rising sun. For Hayes, the fight went beyond tactics on paper or lessons drilled during endless briefings. It was raw, visceral, a test of every nerve and muscle he commanded. The lead element commander's icy voice cut through the radio. "Bounce!" Eyes sharp, guns ready. Then the ripple of aircraft banking, diving, a savage ballet unfolding in the upper atmosphere. As the P-38s rolled into attack, Hayes found his target tenfold, the Zero at the rear of the Japanese formation. The silhouette was unmistakable, the iconic red rising sun emblazoned on fuselage sides, the pilot's helmet glass gleaming like a dark eye watching the heavens. Spooling his guns forward, Hayes drew the trigger in a blur. A volley of .50 caliber rounds and the thunderous bark of a 20mm cannon belching tracer fire. Yet, as months before, the enemy twisted and turned. The Zero snapped a sudden roll, vanishing briefly into the smoke and tracer, only to dive with lethal precision. But something was different. Instead of lagging behind, the P-38 responded like lightning itself, instantaneous, fluid. Hayes yanked the stick left with a velocity he'd never felt before. The big lightning obeyed, pivoting and rolling with the grace of a far smaller fighter. No battle limbo, no hesitation. Pure reflex calibrated by a mechanic's intuition and audacity. The Zero exploded under the hail of bullets. Wings torn, engine erupting into flame. It cartwheeled to the jungle below, a dark bloom of smoke trailing between torn metal and shattered dreams. Hayes's heart surged with relief. This was his first kill. But the fight was far from over. His wingman's warning crackled through the radio. 3 more, diving fast from above. "Get low!" Hayes's fingers slammed forward on the throttles, climbing desperately. But the enemy fighters were quicker in the dive, narrowing the distance with deadly speed. Doctrine screamed in his mind. Climb, run, wait for help. But experience whispered otherwise. This moment required defiance. Throwing caution aside, Hayes flipped the P-38 hard left, pulling into a sudden turnaround maneuver that no pilot would have dared before. The plane flipped and snapped around like a razor blade cutting through the sky. His aircraft moved like liquid steel, obeying every command with immediacy. In that flash, the invisible weight of the past months lifted. The tensioner wire worked. The first Zero hesitated, caught unprepared for the sudden reversal. Hayes took the shot, the .50 cals tearing through metal and wing support. The enemy fighter's wing disappeared mid-flight, sending it tumbling uncontrollably downward. 2 kills now escaped the jaws of death, bought by a secret modification hidden from every commander, and yet vital to survival. The remaining foes circled, each twist and turn a challenge of tactics and nerve. The Zeros tried to scissor, a brutal maneuver designed to force Hayes out of control and expose the larger, heavier fighter to attack. But the P-38 was no longer weighed down by hesitation. Hayes met each move head-on, rolling and pulling with razor-sharp precision. He fired bursts that shattered wings, tore fuselages, and disintegrated enemy hopes. 3 kills in 7 minutes. A miracle by any measure. As the last Zero fled, slipping into clouds like a wounded ghost, Hayes throttled back, aware of thinning fuel and spent ammunition. There was no time for celebration. His squadron was battered but alive. Returning to base, the rumble of engines faded into the distant hum of a jungle alive with war. Back on the tarmac, McKenna waited, grease-stained hands clasped tightly in anticipation. Hayes climbed from the cockpit, eyes wide with disbelief, hands shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. "It worked, Sarge," Hayes rasped, voice raw but triumphant. No elaboration needed. The crew chief's clandestine modification had saved a pilot's life, shifted the tide of fate for a single warrior, perhaps many more. Among those who watched the dogfight from higher altitude was Captain Frank Mitchell, a seasoned pilot of the 475th Fighter Group. From 15,000 feet, Mitchell saw something no one else could. Hayes's P-38 was rolling faster than any lightning he'd encountered or heard of. Movements were sharper, faster, as if the aircraft shed its usual sluggishness. Mitchell sought out Hayes after the mission to understand the cause of this sudden improvement. The answer led him to McKenna, whose hands, perpetually oily from constant work, held the secret. A small piece of bent piano wire, a defiant shift from regulations that rewritten the way the war was being fought in the skies over New Guinea. The story spread quietly, whispered in hangars and briefing rooms. 9 aircraft modified by August 20th. A march, slowed, then halted by tragedy, was suddenly matched by confidence and victory. Pilots previously pinned beneath the weight of impossible odds began to claim kills, returning with glowing tales of a plane transformed. Squadrons, skeptical of unauthorized modifications, were gradually won over by results too clear to deny. Mechanics taught each other the method. Pilots demanded the change. Crews removed piano wire tensioners during inspections to evade official detection, but reinstalled them before combat. Unofficial, undocumented, and yet unmistakably effective. The impact was not only mechanical, but psychological. Where once P-38 pilots had felt tethered by their aircraft's limits, now they felt unchained. The Zero's edge, honed by years of aerial dominance, was blunted. Reports filtered back from the enemy lines. Japanese pilots, confident in their supremacy, found the Americans' trick unknown and unknowable. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, veteran ace with 64 kills, barely escaped death caught off guard by a P-38 that responded in fractions of a second no technical manual foresaw. Tactics that had held true for years crumbled under this invisible advantage. The psychological blow was profound. Zero pilots hesitated, confused by an adversary who refused to dance to the old rhythm. They lost ground, lost kills, and eventually lost their assured dominance. By September's end, the kill ratio reversed. 3 months of growing despair among American pilots turned to cautious hope and then celebration. The P-38, once lumbering and at risk, now surged forward, a weapon reborn. The quiet rebellion of a mechanic in the underbelly of a remote airfield had shifted the balance. In the shadows of the war, the impact of that small tension wire, forgotten by official histories and unpraised in medals, lived on. Lives saved, tactics rewritten, history changed. And yet, the man behind the wire faded into the background, content with knowing he'd done his part. The days following Hayes's extraordinary mission at Huon Gulf were alive with guarded excitement and restless curiosity. Word traveled fast, not over radios or official reports, but through low conversations in dimly lit hangars and the grease-streaked corners of aircraft maintenance bays where mechanics crawled beneath P-38s like surgeons in battle. Technical Sergeant James McKenna, the man behind the mysterious transformation, became an unwitting pioneer. His covert piano wire tensioner was a quiet revolution, unofficial, undocumented, and dangerously unauthorized. Yet, it ignited hope among beleaguered crews who had tasted too many bitter losses and yearned for any edge to tilt the odds. Captain Frank Mitchell wasted no time asking McKenna for the same modification. Mitchell, a leader seasoned in the unforgiving skies, was unafraid of stepping outside regulations if it meant keeping pilots alive. Under moonlit shadows, McKenna worked on another aircraft, installing the tensioner with the same care and urgency, knowing full well the consequences if caught. It was a risk worth taking. No one discussed it openly, but everyone knew the stakes. The cable slack they fought against every mission was a matter of survival. The modification didn't alter engines or add cannons. It restored control, responsiveness, and for pilots like Hayes and Mitchell, a new chance to outmaneuver the enemy. The skepticism was palpable. Some crew chiefs dismissed the idea outright, an insubordinate act that could bring court-martial or worse. Others, hardened by witnessing too many comrades fall, clamored to replicate the modification. Mechanics swapped instructions in hushed tones, sharing the secret tensioner design, bending piano wire in cramped quarters, welding hope in steel and grease. Lieutenant James Watkins of the 49th Fighter Group heard the whispers from a transferred pilot and approached cautiously. He was doubtful, but desperate enough to try it on one aircraft. When the pilot returned that very mission with his first kill in weeks, Watkins embraced the modification fully, retrofitting 4 more planes. Slowly, the modification found its way into squadrons across New Guinea, spreading like wildfire among those who understood its value. Official inspections became a charade. Tensioners were removed to keep within inspection specifications, only to be reinstalled before takeoff. McKenna and his allies mastered this dance of subversion, prioritizing pilot safety over bureaucracy. The higher-ups noticed subtle changes, control cable tensions fluctuating unpredictably, but lacked the evidence or will to act decisively. The kill statistics told a compelling story. July had been brutal. The P-38 squadrons lost 2 planes for every 0 destroyed, a ratio no one wanted to repeat. By August, the numbers began to tighten. The kill ratio shifted to nearly 1-to-1, and by September, it tipped in favor of the American Lightnings. Pilots who had fled in fear now pressed aggressive attacks, confident in their aircraft's ability to respond. Japanese forces were taken aback. Their pilots, masters of the Sky Warrior dance, the tight turns, sudden reversals, found the American fighters unwilling to be baited into fatal traps. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most revered aces, engaged a P-38 in early September, expecting the usual sluggish response. Instead, he met with a fighter that mirrored every maneuver with unerring rapidity, disrupting his attack and forcing a narrow escape. Sakai's encounter wasn't isolated. Reports flooded the 11th Air Fleet. American P-38s rolling faster, reversing curves with newfound agility, turning fights upside down. Confusion crept through their ranks. Tactics honed through years of dominance faltered against this unseen change. Pilots grew cautious, hesitant to engage, their confidence wavering. The Japanese response was mixed. Some abandoned the turning fights, attempting hit-and-run strikes better suited to evade the Lightning's superior firepower and speed. Others pushed aggressively into close-range combustion, sacrificing caution for opportunity, often with fatal consequences. August and September became months of painful adjustment, as methods once invincible were rendered vulnerable by a secret no one in the enemy camp could detect. Back in the American ranks, the psychological boost was profound. Survivors of the early July defeats found hope renewed. That little piece of piano wire, carefully bent and fitted in the shadows, was rewriting the rules of engagement. Morale lifted, and with it, pilot performance improved, a ripple effect far beyond mechanics and manuals. Yet, the tale was not without tension. Official channels began to stir uneasily. An alert maintenance inspector noticed inconsistent cable tension readings during routine checks in late September. Delving deeper, he uncovered the unauthorized modifications, tracing the tensioners to their clandestine origins. Reports ascended through the ranks with an urgency tempered by uncertainty. Regulations had been broken, yet the modification improved survival. For nearly 3 weeks, the chain of command wrestled with a dilemma: to punish those who defied orders or to quietly endorse the unauthorized fix. Officers debated in shadowed rooms while combat losses became statistics that stood glaringly stark beside sudden rises in kills. Then came the moment of reckoning. In November, Lockheed dispatched an engineering team to New Guinea to investigate. The squadron waited in uneasy silence as tests were conducted, measuring cable tensions, analyzing loads, flying trials to verify the impact. The conclusions were definitive. The piano wire tensioner was safe, effective, and should have been part of the original design. Despite this, official recognition bypassed the mechanic who risked everything. The improved control system was credited to formal engineering analysis, while McKenna's role was omitted, his actions unacknowledged in military reports, medals unearned, his courageous defiance hidden behind bureaucratic screens. Undeterred, McKenna returned to civilian life after the war, his legacy etched invisibly in the history of countless pilots saved by a small wire and a mechanic's determination. Yet the story lived quietly among survivors, whispered in hangar shadows, and carried forward by men who knew where true innovation sometimes began. Among the many who benefited from McKenna's quiet innovation was Lieutenant Robert Hayes himself, whose life was forever changed by that small, clandestine piece of piano wire. After his initial dramatic encounter over Huon Gulf, Hayes flew a remarkable 63 combat missions. Each sortie, each dogfight, was a testament to resilience and the secret edge inside his P-38's control cables. Hayes was no longer that green farm kid from Iowa, unsure and hesitant. With his aircraft responding instantly to his commands, he gained confidence to press attacks and seize opportunities that had previously slipped away. By war's end, Hayes had notched 11 confirmed aerial kills, a rare feat. Yet, beyond the statistics, it was survival that mattered most. His story wasn't unique, but it was emblematic. Captain Frank Mitchell, who became a squadron commander, credited the modification not only with increasing kill counts, but with saving lives, including his own, and that of many under his command. Mitchell's first-hand experience of the Lightning, transformed from cumbersome to deadly agile, influenced how he led his pilots, instilling in them courage and trust in their machines. Even beyond combat roles, crew chiefs like James Watkins were changed by the innovation in their hands. Watkins's skepticism turned to belief as pilots returned with victories, altering his approach to maintenance, a craft that was often unseen, but critical on the warfront. His story was one of many mechanics who shared McKenna's determination to do whatever it took, bending rules in service to a higher command, preserving life. The modification also had tragic shadows. The pilots lost before the wire's installation, like Lieutenant David Chen and Captain William Morrison, were haunting reminders of what had been at stake. Chen's narrow escape with bullet-riddled aircraft, and Morrison's fatal crash after his controls felt mushy, underscored that many paid with their lives for a flaw long ignored by official channels. Their names lived not just in logs, but in the hearts of those who rebuilt hope from loss. Lieutenant Thomas Parker's story particularly resonated within the maintenance crews and pilots as one of heartbreaking failure, not of skill, but of machinery. His desperate calls over the radio, pleading for help as his airplane lagged in turning, echoed through the base. In the aftermath, McKenna's conviction deepened that this was not pilot error, but a tangible mechanical failing, an invisible enemy in the steel sinews of the Lightning. Each man who flew with the modified cable carried a piece of this legacy into the sky. The transformation went beyond engineering. It was the flight of human ingenuity, courage, and a mechanic's refusal to stand idle while pilots perished. The war is often told through the roar of guns and the fall of rain, but it's also shaped by small acts of defiance and care in the shadows. Through these personal stories, the broader narrative of the Pacific Air War emerges. Not only a battle of nations, but of men wrestling with machines, regulations, and the limits of human endurance. McKenna's wire was more than a tool. It was a symbol of innovation born from desperation, a lifeline threaded through the skies by those who dared to challenge the rules to save a brother in arms. By late 1943, as squadrons returned from missions with stories of stunning aerial prowess, enabled by rapid roll rates and tighter control, the transformation was palpable. Pilots traded tactics, sharing tales of the lightning that moved like a falcon rather than a freight carrier. The fear and fatalism that once dominated the skies began to erode, replaced with cautious optimism and renewed aggression. This collective shift impacted not only individual pilots, but the entire ethos of air combat in the theater. No longer were the P-38s at a disadvantage in dogfights where quick reaction times were everything. They became threats rooted not just in firepower, but in the mechanical precision that McKenna's tensioner restored. As the battles raged across the islands and skies of the Pacific, the silent wire within the P-38s turned the tides, allowing American fighters to fight not only harder, but smarter. Lives were saved, tactics altered, and the war itself nudged toward a future where pilots flying the fork-tailed Devil could finally match the Zero on its own terms. As the victories mounted behind the scenes on New Guinea's rugged airfields, a quiet storm was brewing among the top brass of the Army Air Forces and Lockheed's engineering division. The unapproved, game-changing modification, the piano wire tensioner, was no longer a secret confined to maintenance bays and whispered in shadows. It had entered the realm where regulations met reality, and the cost of inaction could be measured in lives lost. The first sign of official trouble appeared when a routine inspection in late September uncovered irregularities in cable tension readings. The maintenance inspector's scrutiny was meticulous, driven by years of experience. When he traced the fluctuations back to what was then termed unofficial patchwork, the elephant in the room became undeniable. The invisible wire, the simple bent piece of piano string, was altering the aircraft's response in flight. The investigation was swift but delicate. Command knew the potential implications. Acknowledging unapproved modifications meant opening a Pandora's box. It was a choice between risking a scandal or quietly managing a hidden advantage. The evidence was clear. The telemetry and physical inspection confirmed that the control cable's tension was consistently higher in squadrons employing the wire. The change aligned perfectly with the combat reports of improved maneuverability. In the War Office's conference rooms, debates danced like shadows. The engineers at Lockheed, whisked into the field on government orders, performed flight tests, measured stresses, and examined wreckage. Their technical report was unequivocal. This simple tensioner made the P-38 respond faster, more precisely, and with less delay. It was, in essence, a refined control system, one that could save lives and alter the outcome of aerial battles. But the report also posed a profound dilemma. Officially, the modification violated the strict rules of engineering and operational procedures. It was an unapproved field modification, an act of insubordination with potentially catastrophic consequences if discovered. The question was whether the benefits justified the risks, an internal debate cloaked in bureaucratic silence and the fear of repercussions. While the high command deliberated, the reality on the front lines persisted. Pilots continued returning with remarkable dogfighting stories, their aircraft now responding with a speed and agility unthinkable before McKenna's covert intervention. The number of kills increased, losses decreased, and a faint hope flickered in the collective spirit of those fighting in the skies. Throughout October, the story remained in the shadows, until a decision was made. The engineers, upon detailed analysis, recommended that the modification be formally evaluated and, if found safe, integrated into the production models. They argued that the change was not only technically sound, but essential to maintaining American dominance in the Pacific theater. Their conclusion, supported by the data, brought a tentative approval for further testing, with strict oversight and documentation. Yet, politically and bureaucratically, the decision was mired in reticence. Military officials feared the repercussions of officially endorsing an unauthorized fix. The story of McKenna and the wire remained classified, locked behind an administrative firewall that prioritized regulation over innovation, control over survival. The brave mechanic's clandestine act was transformed into a secret weapon, an unspoken chapter in the great narrative of war. The High Command grappled with the paradox. Do they recognize the ingenuity that had turned the tide? Or do they suppress it, fearing precedent, accountability, and the loss of total control? Ultimately, the silence prevailed. The modification was not officially adopted, its existence hidden not only from enemies but from their own officers. The heroism of a mechanic who broke the rules to save lives was consigned to secrecy, a ghost story whispered in the shadows of a war that demanded obedience and innovation alike. Meanwhile, McKenna, back in Long Beach after the war, remained unaware of the full impact of his work. His wires, his tinkering, had forever altered the course of the Pacific conflict. History would later acknowledge that the true turning point was crafted not from grand strategy or technological breakthroughs, but from a moment of courage in a cramped aircraft hangar. An act of defiance that saved dozens, if not hundreds, of lives. The unsung craftsman, the mechanic who saw the flaw and dared to fix it outside the rules, became a quiet legend. In the corridors of power, his name was never spoken. But in the skies above New Guinea, his handiwork soared, silent, unseen, unstoppable. By the fall of 1943, whispers of an American shift in aerial dominance began to ripple far beyond the shaded airfields of New Guinea. Japanese forces, steeped in years of confident supremacy and dogfights, faced a new and unsettling reality. The once sluggish P-38 Lightning was now a predator with a lethal edge that no training manual could explain. The Japanese 11th Air Fleet, responsible for defending the Pacific skies, was first to observe the change. Reports from seasoned pilots detailed an unexpected agility in the American fighters, a speed and responsiveness in rolls, turns, and reversals that outmatched even the famously nimble Mitsubishi Zero. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, revered for his skill and 64 confirmed kills, epitomized the shock of this transformation. In early September, he engaged a P-38 piloted by an unknown adversary that mirrored his every move with uncanny immediacy. Sakai's signature tactic, drawing an enemy into a turning fight, then snapping away to gain the advantage, failed spectacularly as the P-38 countered with unprecedented speed. Sakai narrowly avoided collision, forced to break off the engagement and retreat. His report, along with those from other aces, sparked alarm in Japanese command. Their tactics, honed over years of dominance, were no longer infallible. The psychological impact was profound, eroding the confidence of pilots who had once dominated the skies. Japanese pilots scrambled to adapt. Some abandoned their favored turning fights in favor of hit-and-run tactics, leveraging speed and stealth over maneuverability. Others sought to close the range drastically, gambling on their firepower to overcome the Lightning's improved responsiveness. Both strategies, emerging from uncertainty, came at great cost. Experienced pilots fell, and cohesion faltered under the weight of this invisible handicap. Meanwhile, American squads embraced the newfound advantage with cautious but growing enthusiasm. Pilots who had once felt at the mercy of the Zero's agility now pressed their assaults with renewed confidence. The modification's effect transcended mere mechanics. It breathed new life into combat doctrine and pilot morale. The P-38 was no longer a lumbering giant, but a disciplined fighter capable of owning the skirmish. Behind the scenes, the breadth of McKenna's wire's impact became clear. Squadrons throughout the Southwest Pacific began covertly adopting the tensioner, often without knowledge of its origin, driven by tales of flying transformed and lives saved. The kill ratios shifted dramatically. Where losses had outnumbered victories 2-1, the tide inverted. By September, Americans were downing Zeros at a near 1-to-1 rate, signaling a deeper shift in the battle for air supremacy. This change did not escape the notice of Japanese intelligence, which dispatched teams to investigate crashed P-38s and interrogate captured pilots. Yet, they found no new technology, no secret weapon, only standard aircraft seemingly unchanged, but flying with a new vigor. This invisible modification defied detection and understanding, frustrating enemy efforts to counter it. Post-war, the story of McKenna's modification might have faded into obscurity, if not for the diligent work of military historians poring over maintenance logs and pilot reports years later. In 1991, nearly 5 decades after those tense mornings in New Guinea, a historian uncovered references to piano wire tensioners in squadron records, sparking a search for the man behind the change. James McKenna, then 73 and still working in his Long Beach garage, was contacted. The modest mechanic, who had never sought recognition or fame, recounted the story simply. A necessary fix born from watching friends die and refusing to accept loss as inevitable. The historian estimated that McKenna's modification had saved tens, perhaps hundreds, of lives. A quiet hero whose gift was survival itself. While official records failed to record McKenna's name or deed, his legacy lived on in lives extended, missions completed, and history altered. The simple wire, hidden away in the mechanics' toolboxes and aircraft booms, symbolized how courage, ingenuity, and quiet defiance could turn the tide of war. The guns fell silent, the skies cleared, and the war that had waged fiercely across vast oceans slowly drew to a close. For those who survived the relentless battles of the Pacific, life returned in waves, changed forever by what they endured, and by the invisible threads of fate woven into every aircraft they flew. Lieutenant Robert Hayes returned home to Iowa after the war, his wartime tally boasting 11 kills and 63 combat missions to show for years of sacrifice and survival. The farm boy who had nervously climbed into his P-38 at WWII was gone, replaced by a seasoned veteran who carried the weight of experience etched deep into his eyes. Hayes married his high school sweetheart, settled into a quiet life as a crop duster, and raised 4 children. Though distance separated him from the war's front lines, the lessons of combat remained close. Every year on August 17th, marking the day his life was irrevocably changed by McKenna's modification, Hayes would call the sergeant to thank him. Their bond was forged in the crucible of necessity, a private testament to the power of unsung heroes. Captain Frank Mitchell's journey echoed this blend of valor and humility. Rising to command his own squadron, Mitchell led his men through critical campaigns, shooting down 16 enemy aircraft along the way. After the conflict, he remained in the Air Force until his retirement as a colonel in 1963, carrying with him not only combat medals, but the story of McKenna's wire, a story he passed down to every young maintenance officer he trained. Mitchell understood, better than most, that innovation in war is often born in the quiet defiance of those working in shadows, whose names never make the headlines, but whose impact resonates in victory and survival. His respect for McKenna's courage shaped how he viewed leadership, not just as command, but as stewardship of life and legacy. James McKenna himself returned to California life with a steady heart, reopening a garage to work on cars, a trade both familiar and honest. For decades, he carried the memories of service quietly, rarely speaking of the war or the modification he'd risked everything to install. To neighbors and customers, he was just a mechanic. To those who knew the truth, he was a man who changed how war was fought without seeking praise. His obituary, published in 2006, noted his service as an aircraft mechanic, but made no mention of the piano wire tensioner that saved countless lives. The silent innovation hidden within the folds of history, overshadowed by protocol and bureaucracy. These stories remind us that progress in conflict is not always the product of grand design or official sanction. Sometimes, it is the risk and resolve of one individual seeing a problem and refusing to accept it as unchangeable. McKenna's small act of rebellion had life or death consequences, not only for pilots racing across the Pacific theater, but for how innovation is understood in times of crisis. The war itself was shaped by millions of such moments, of individuals acting beyond orders, of mechanics, pilots, and soldiers whose courage was expressed in small but profound acts. The piano wire tensioner symbolizes this quiet heroism, a lesson that sometimes the most impactful weapons are innovation, perseverance, and the will to make a difference when no one is watching. As we remember the sacrifices and victories of World War II, it is these hidden stories, the ones not etched on monuments but kept alive by voices passing them forward, that challenge us to look deeper into history and appreciate the full tapestry of human endeavor behind every headline, medal, and victory. The piano wire tensioner, humble in its form yet profound in its effect, left an indelible mark on aviation history, a testament to how field innovation can reshape warfare even when unacknowledged by official record. Following Lockheed's formal approval of the cable tension modification, the design was incorporated into later P-38 models, notably the P-38J, which entered production in December 1943. This integration transformed the Lightning's handling characteristics on a systemic level, ensuring that thousands of subsequent aircraft benefited from a responsiveness that had once been a secret known only to a few. Beyond the P-38, the lesson was clear to military engineers and strategists alike. Frontline feedback could no longer be ignored. The experience underscored the importance of flexibility in design and operations, recognizing that strict adherence to specifications could prove deadly, especially in the dynamic environments of war. The cable slack issue and its fix sparked greater attention to control system ergonomics and precision in aircraft manufacturing. Future fighter designs increasingly emphasized minimized control lag and increased pilot feedback, understanding that responsiveness could be the difference between life and death in the skies. Moreover, McKenna's story became a case study in military innovation, not of grand programs or institutional breakthroughs, but of individual initiative, rapid problem-solving, and the courage to act beyond prescribed limits. It highlighted the vital role of enlisted personnel and non-commissioned officers as key players in technological advancement, often overlooked by hierarchical structures. The narrative also exposed tensions between regulation and adaptability in combat environments. Rules designed for order sometimes hampered timely innovation, especially when bureaucracy outweighed frontline realities. McKenna's unauthorized fix thus symbolizes the perennial conflict between protocol and necessity, a balance every modern military continues to navigate. In the decades since, militaries worldwide have incorporated more channels for rapid feedback and prototype testing from operational units, aiming to empower those closest to the conflict to drive improvements. Yet, McKenna's tale remains a reminder of the risks and sacrifices involved when innovation is forced into the shadows. In civilian aviation and automotive fields, principles from such wartime advances influenced control system designs, contributing to safer, more responsive machines. Engineers draw lessons from wartime urgency, how constraints breed ingenuity, and simple solutions withstand the test of harsh environments. While many remember World War II through its grand battles and sweeping strategies, it's these small, pivotal technical evolutions that underpin victory. The piano wire tensioner, bent by a grease-stained hand in a distant Pacific hangar, embodies the power of innovation at its most human, accessible, incremental, and driven by an unyielding will to save lives. McKenna's story encourages us to honor not just heroes in the cockpit or command, but those whose quiet work underpins the machinery of war and peace. Their unwavering commitment to improvement defines progress far beyond the battlefield, weaving through every advance in technology and every act of courage born from necessity. Years after the last combat mission and the final engine roar fell silent, the story of McKenna's piano wire tensioner remained buried beneath layers of official indifference and wartime secrecy. The modification's impact was etched in victory ratios and survivor stories, yet the man behind it lived quietly, almost anonymously, far from the spotlight that shines on generals and aces. In 1991, nearly half a century later, that silence was broken by the patient work of a military historian slogging through weathered maintenance logs, unit diaries, and after-action reports archived in forgotten drawers. His research uncovered the first hints of the tensioners, references that painted a fascinating picture of an unapproved fix spreading through squadrons, linked to saved lives and transformed missions. Tracking down James McKenna was a journey across time and geography. The elderly mechanic, still turning wrenches in his Long Beach garage, was reluctant to claim credit, but never hesitated to confirm the story. For McKenna, it was never about recognition. It had been about a desperate need to save pilots, men he counted as brothers, from a flaw that threatened their survival. The historian's work sparked renewed interest in McKenna's contribution, stirring conversations in military and aviation circles about unsung innovators and the hidden hands shaping history. Yet, formal acknowledgement lagged. The military's cautious stance and the wariness of revisiting unauthorized actions kept official commendations at bay, softening the story into legend rather than proven fact. Nevertheless, veterans from the Pacific Theater and their families rallied quietly, sharing stories and advocating for McKenna's place in the annals of World War II. For those who understood the stakes, the small wire symbolized not just mechanical ingenuity, but the spirit of sacrifice and determination that defined the war's human dimension. Memorials and museums have since included McKenna's story in exhibits and narratives of the P-38 Lightning, recognizing the delicate interplay between engineering and bravery. His legacy serves as a bridge between the front line and the workshop, reminding us that history is shaped as much by unseen hands as by celebrated deeds. In a broader reflection, McKenna's story challenges how societies remember war. Beyond medals and battles, to honor those whose quiet actions ripple across time, changing lives and shaping outcomes without fanfare or fame. It is a call to embrace the full complexity of history, to lift up the hidden heroes alongside the known. The faded photograph in his former garage, showing a young mechanic standing beside a P-38 in the New Guinea sun, remains a silent testament to the power of small acts. Though ownership and faces change, the image captures a moment of courage and quiet rebellion that altered the course of the Pacific War and left a legacy of survival no official report could fully capture. The story of James McKenna and his clandestine modification might have remained hidden in the shadows of history, unrecognized but profound. Yet, in the steady march of time, it emerges as a powerful testament to the capacity for individual agency to shape the course of history, especially in moments of chaos and conflict. War, at its core, is a complex mesh of strategies, technology, and human will. But at its very foundation are countless acts, small and seemingly insignificant, that carry the potential to alter outcomes dramatically. McKenna's act of bending and installing a piece of piano wire was more than a mechanical fix. It was a declaration that ingenuity, courage, and a willingness to challenge authority can save lives, even when formal systems falter. This story underscores a timeless lesson, that progress often emerges not from top-down mandates, but from the gritty, relentless problem-solving of individuals on the ground. The best solutions in warfare, just like in life, are frequently born out of desperation, observation, and the refusal to accept defeat as inevitable. History, however, is often wired to celebrate the visible, the heroes, the campaigns, the victories, while quietly eclipsing the unseen champions. McKenna's name was never etched beside medal recipients or celebrated in grand ceremonies. Yet his impact echoes through the lives he saved and the changed tactics that helped turn the tide of a brutal Pacific War. The narrative invites us to reconsider how we define heroism. True heroism isn't always about medals or fame. Sometimes, it's about the unspoken courage to act when it's easiest to remain silent. McKenna, a simple mechanic from Long Beach, exemplifies this quiet heroism. An ordinary man who dared to forge a path through necessity. In teaching future generations, this story becomes a vital lesson. Innovation thrives in environments where questions are asked, norms are challenged, and the human spirit refuses to accept limitations imposed by bureaucracy or tradition. It reminds us that in any sphere, whether war, science, or everyday life, courage and ingenuity are the cornerstones of progress. As the final chapter closes on this recounting of a war-won secret, it leaves behind a lingering truth, that sometimes the most powerful force in history is a single act of defiance, and that within every individual, buried beneath layers of routine and regulation, lies the potential to change the world for the better. In remembering McKenna's quiet rebellion, we honor not just his name, but the timeless principle that everyday people, when motivated by purpose and conviction, can redefine the course of history. Their stories remind us that progress isn't just forged in the fires of grand campaigns, but also in the small spaces where courage meets opportunity. And so, the story of the wire remains a beacon, a reminder that innovation, in any era, is born from individuals daring to do what others won't. Their legacy is not just in the victory they help secure, but in the daring spirit they ignite within us all.